topic is about use of caucusing, right? And today's presentation will be revolved around three main questions: why to caucus, when to use caucus, and how to make the best of it. And before we dive deep into the topic, let's recall what the caucus is, because some of you are beginners, some of you are experienced mediators already, but still, what is the caucus? Caucus is a meeting mediators hold separately with each party of a dispute. Caucus is called by the mediator or by one of the parties. Information revealed in caucus is confidential, and other names for caucus are private session and individual meeting. Caucus is also called as a tool, as a mode or format of conducting mediation, and as a technique. So let us start with a quick poll just to find out whether you use caucusing or not. And then we will continue. Just let me start the poll. We will have 4 questions. Can you see them? So the first one, I would like to use caucusing, but I do not know how to do it properly. The second, I prefer joint sessions because I'm facilitative. For sure, I mostly use private sessions because I'm evaluative. And the fourth one, I prefer to use both joint and private sessions. If neither applies to you, just ignore all of them. So just let me briefly comment. So the results are on the screen. For those who would like to use caucusing but do not know how to do it properly, it's a normal situation. It's a matter of time and practice. As for options number 2 and 3, so as you know, caucus itself is an attribute of evaluative mediation. But as you know, but as you also know, mediation is flexible. And it's very difficult to stick to pure, let's say, facilitative or evaluative approach. Almost all facilitative mediators use some elements of evaluative approach. So I myself belong to the 4th category. I prefer to use both joint and private sessions. Okay, thank you. So now let me share my presentation again. If to speak in general, why we caucus? We caucus to vent intense emotions of parties, to clarify issues and explore interests, to word a question, a request, a proposal of one party to the other before convening it, and collect all the puzzles related to the story. I call those who use joint meetings approach one-door approach, and those who prefer caucusing, 3-door approach. So one-door approach is about one door which parties with their lawyers and mediator or mediators enter, and they stay at the same table from the beginning till the very end until they reach a settlement, or maybe not. And why some mediators choose this approach? First, less resources required. Just imagine that you need 3 rooms and you need to equip them. And there is only 1 room needed if you use joint meetings approach. Second, impartiality. So the proponents of this approach, they believe that it is much easier to follow the principle of impartiality if mediator works with parties in joint meetings. Also, it is much easier to ensure direct communication between disputants. The proponents of this approach assume that private meetings approach to some extent may confuse the role of a mediator and challenge it, because it may be misused by parties and shifted from the role of mediator to the role of a postwoman or postman, when mediator simply conveys information from one party to another. And mediator's role implies much more than simply conveying information. And also for the proponents of this approach, it is easier to avoid the dilemma of deciding whom to caucus first. What about those mediators who use three-door approach? So let's say, what are the advantages of caucusing? The advantages, the first advantage is that this approach helps to manage unpredictability to some extent. Because when a mediator works with parties in private sessions, in private meetings, it means that for him or for her, it is easier to take full control of the process. And if there is some, I don't know, urgent situation or some information revealed, new information, it is easier to react or to prevent something. Of course, if there are high emotions running in the room, private meetings, they help to ease the tension between parties. In terms of managing power imbalances, caucusing works very well. Also, caucusing enables mediator to manage properly the information provided by parties. By this, I mean, for mediator, it is much easier to decide what, when, and how to convey. For example, imagine situation when one party wants an apology, and the other party is not ready to deliver this apology yet. So mediator is very helpful in terms of deciding when and how to deliver this apology. When to call a caucus? When there is a very sensitive issue or question is to be discussed, when unexpected information is revealed at some point at any phase of mediation. And by the way, there are three types of caucus: early caucus, middle caucus, and end caucus, and they're used for different purposes. When the emotions running high, once I had a situation, it was a long time ago. So it was a joint meeting. The parties represented different genders. The female party said something that wasn't pleasant to the male party, and he stood up and said, "Now I'm gonna hit you." And I just said, "Please don't forget that I'm still here. Let's take a break." We took a break, and then we continued after break in private sessions. And private sessions were very helpful. When confrontation between parties is escalating, you see there is already a dispute or a conflict between parties. And sometimes in mediation, when they are discussing those issues, the confrontation may get even higher, to higher level. And caucusing is also helpful when you see that confrontation is escalating, just to continue in private meetings. And also, caucus is called upon parties' request. And it's very helpful to let parties know about this, their right, that not only mediator can call a caucus, but also parties have this right to call a caucus. So how to make best of a caucus? First, you need to explain how caucus works. Typically, we as mediators do it in premediation phase, if you have it in your practice. And also, we do it in our opening at the beginning of mediation session. So everybody knows what caucus is, who can call a caucus, and what are the purposes. Then to decide which party to caucus first. There are different approaches to this point. For example, if there are requesting and responding party, then typically the requesting party starts with opening remarks, and then as for caucus, the requesting party has this right to caucus first. If, for example, there are no requesting and responding party, there are just parties who applied for mediation together, then again, there are different situations when caucus is reasonable. For example, if emotions running high, it means that one of the parties is very emotional. And it means that you should start caucusing with this particular party. And of course, be mindful of timing. When mediation takes place in person, caucus, it's good if caucus takes 10-15 minutes, not more. Another way, when we conduct mediation online, when I conduct mediation online and I know, for example, that one of the parties is not able to participate in today's session, and we are caucusing, then the caucus may, for example, take more than 10-15 minutes. It may take even 1 hour. And the next day, we will have the same 1 hour caucus with the other party. Caucusing is very helpful in terms of demonstrating your empathy, because sometimes when you do it in joint meeting, you demonstrate your empathy to one party, the other party may misinterpret it. So in caucus, if you still stay impartial, it is easier to show your empathy. Also, it is helpful to engage non-caucusing party with homework, let's say. So when you, for example, leave non-caucusing party with a question or questions, you keep this party engaged in process, and the time then runs faster. Another thing to make the best of caucus is to handle confidential information properly. And I have a question for you here. Please name me the area or areas in which caucus is not confidential by default, if you know, of course. What are the areas in which caucus is not confidential by default? As for example, of course, okay, a small hint. In civil and commercial mediation, caucus is confidential by default. And what are the areas in which caucus is not confidential by default? Any ideas? Okay, I will open. Okay, we have something in the chat. Construction contract dispute. I do not know about construction contract dispute, because I think this kind of disputes, they also belong to civil and commercial disputes, community disputes. Any other ideas? Okay, I will open the secret. It's family mediation. So in family mediation, parties have to agree in advance that all the information communicated in private sessions to be kept confidential. If they don't, it means that everything that is shared will be shared with them both. And this is an exception. And of course, you shouldn't forget about transition from joint meeting to private session, and then back from private session to joint meeting, unless it is pure shuttle mediation, when everything happens in private sessions from the beginning till very end. If it's just if it's not a shuttle mediation, it's a common mediation. So then you have to ensure this smooth transition. So how to ensure it? First, you need to explain that now we will have a caucus, and why are you going to have a caucus? And then how to make this transition back to the joint meeting. You need to be sure that, okay, we explored parties' interests, we clarified all the issues, parties are ready to share, let's say, some solution options with each other, or to share information that is valuable for both of them. then okay, it's time to get back to the joint meeting. I would also like to share with you some of the questions. You see, if these questions are asked in joint meeting, you may make one of the parties you are asking uncomfortable, or you may get partial answer. But in my view, these questions are very helpful and useful to the process. And these are the questions to ask in the caucus. Why is it important to you? How would it feel for the other party? What if you were in their shoes? What makes you hesitant about the option offered by the other side? What would you like me to share with the other party? Just the 5 questions, but of course there are much more helpful questions which are asked specifically in caucus. Usually I don't overwhelm parties in my mediation practice with different kinds of surveys, feedback forms. If they want to share something, or if they want to give me the feedback, they do it right after the mediation, and I'm thankful for that. But while preparing to this webinar, I asked a number of parties and lawyers about their perception, because I think, yes, this was about mediators' perception of caucusing, but their perception of caucus as clients to mediation is also important. And these are their perception. I was able to reveal my weaknesses and still feel comfortable. I'm okay with private meetings, knowing that it is confidential and that the mediator spends with me the same amount of time she spends with the other side. So this was the feedback of clients. And the next is about lawyers. Despite the confidential nature of caucus, I am not proponent of full disclosure of my client's information. However, I found individual meetings helpful in terms of framing wisely and thinking thoroughly before acting. I'm wondering how commercial mediation can be conducted exclusively in joint meetings. I prefer my client and I have enough space and privacy to strategize our next steps with the help of mediator. So mediation is unique, and I think caucusing makes it even more unique, because we divide people to bring their confronting positions and conflicting interests together at the end. Thank you for joining, and welcome to the IM campus. You're welcome with your questions. I think we have something in the chat, right?
Let me see. Oh, in the chat there were just here there was one comment. I was forced, court ordered, to attend mediation and had to be in the same room as the person who was in a domestic violence situation with me. It was awful. I think there was a comment to that.
And this is a situation for private sessions from the very beginning. In this kind of situations, as I know, even the initial meetings are conducted separately. You see? Of course, they should be conducted separately. Any other questions? Just feel free to raise your hand. Ingrida.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I was trying to type the question. Meanwhile, I was wondering, because you've mentioned something like shuttle mediation or something like that. Can you please maybe just explain more when this can be applied? Only mediation in caucus, let's say.
Shuttle mediation is applied, for example, when there is a dispute before states even, but this approach is also applied in some commercial disputes. And I know real cases when this approach was applied, when very ambitious parties, managers of the big businesses, they did not want to be in the same room, and they chose a shuttle mediation. So they were in private meetings from very beginning till very end, and they even signed settlement agreements separately. I hope I answered your question, Ingrida.
Yes, thank you so much. In the case which has been mentioned here also in the family situation or something which is also, let's say, non-commercial, non-state related, is it possible that also everything goes only through such kind of mediation format?
Yes, in this kind of cases, the whole process is conducted, it must be conducted separately. Because it's a specific case. And as I know, not in all countries, in these cases, mediation is possible to apply. So if it is applied, usually the whole process, the entire process is conducted separately. Rania and then Nauman.
Just based on one of the comments where the lawyer was talking about not wanting not preferring full disclosure of information. I'm wondering if the lawyer's presence, if as a mediator you can call to see the parties themselves without their lawyers, because it sounds like if the lawyers are there, you're still in the spirit of courts and each looking for their own interests rather than finding a true resolution. It's yeah, I'm just wondering about the complexity of having lawyers in the caucus.
I will tell you even more. So this was the feedback of one lawyer, but in most of the cases, nobody shares 100% of information, especially when they accompanied with lawyers, because lawyers still keep a litigation option in their mind in case if mediation does not work. So as for the question about calling a caucus with parties separately and then lawyers, yes, it's possible, and it is called cross caucus. So mediator may have a caucus with cross caucus with parties, and then a cross caucus with lawyers.
You have the right to ask for only.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right.
Nauman?
Yeah, hello, Fidana. Well, my question is that during this caucus session, if the party asks the mediator that, can you kindly share the information from the other parties that were in the caucus with your team or the co-mediators? So can the mediator at that point, while during that session, can he or she can share the information from the other parties as well or not? Like from their perspective, whatever they want to know about the other party, what the mediator has learned from them. So is it possible, or that's confidential between that party and the party that you are talking, or should we share that?
Do you mean that mediator should ask permission to share information with one party before convening with the other, right?
Yeah. Like for example, if I'm with the party A, I'm doing a caucus with them, and my co-mediators are with party B, and they have some information regarding whatever they wanted to ask from them. And the party A, which I am mediating, they ask that, please share the information what you have gathered from the other party. Can we do that during my session? Can I share the information from the other party's side as well or not?
I will be frank. I'm not proponent of doing co-mediation separately, because I think co-mediation is not about mediating with, dividing mediators. It's about co-mediation. They work together. It means that they conduct caucuses also together.
Yeah.
And I do not know in this situation, how do they share the confidential information? What I know definitely that after conducting a caucus, you need to ask one more time what information is to be kept confidential and what information is to be shared with the other party. And just to make it clear, because I know real cases when mediator misunderstood or maybe was not actively listening to the party and shared the confidential information with the other party. Another thing, it is also about confidentiality. You should be very mindful of the notes you are making. If you're making notes, just be sure that they are always with you, not to forget them in one room while you are in the other room. This I can say 100%. This is what I know about confidentiality.
Thank you.
Oleg?
Hello, Fidana. If you let me, I would like to share my insight that I got during yesterday's simulation and to hear and I would like to hear your feedback from the finest of your experience.
You're welcome to share.
Yeah, yesterday we had a simulation, and it was an aquarium, one mediator after another, in a big room. So, and it's a simulation, I can tell it quite freely about the things in it. And it was quite a strong emotion from one party. And after generating topics, it was like, it's okay. Now I don't know what we are doing here, why we're here, what's that about mediation. And to work with this strong emotion, I decided to use Caucus. And I understood that it was one more reason to keep neutrality, because when one party starts to talk quite for a long time, so it takes a lot of effort to make other party to think that you really remember that she's here to get back. And so I decided that it's really more comfortable to take this 10 minutes to talk with one party than to just talking with one party. For me, that okay, we don't forget about you, please. It's we understand that I understand that it's hard to hear strong emotions and so on. Just yes. So I would like to hear your feedback.
So you called an early caucus, let's say, right? Because you saw some high emotions of one party at the very beginning, just when at the phase of agenda setting, right? As I understood.
It was after agenda setting and after agenda setting, yes. And it was first an attempt to deal with the emotions for about 1 or 2 minutes. It was just 10 minutes for the whole just simulation for my part.
And this was a correct decision to make, because this was a situation when caucus should be called. I mean, yes, you may stay courageous and continue in joint meeting, but it may take much more time and just end to be unsuccessful, you know. That's why, in my view, it's not about ability to deal with parties, if you are even experienced mediator, to deal with parties in joint meetings. You see, if you see that there is a situation when one party is very emotional, and the goal of mediation, of course, is not to make them even more emotional, right? First, you need to understand why this emotion comes out. And what I found out when caucusing with emotional parties, I don't know how it works, but when you acknowledge their emotions, when you show empathy, and when you try to understand why this emotion arises, they come down, you see? And this was the correct decision, so in my view. And it is called an early caucus. An early caucus is not something that is called quite often. In most of the cases, it is typically middle caucus or end caucus. As for commercial mediation, almost all commercial mediators, they used a mixed approach, facilitative plus evaluative, or pure evaluative. But those who use mixed approach or hybrid one, they start with facilitative to make parties feel comfortable, to build trust, rapport. And then when they're ready, so the first part is in joint meeting, and then they shift to private sessions. And this is an element of evaluative approach. So if your question was about whether your decision was correct, yes, it was correct. It was a situation for caucus.
Thank you very much, Fidana.
So we have something in the chat.
Yes, there are 2 questions in the chat.
Do you look into the contract between 2 parties before mediation to know who is violating the contract agreement? Yes, typically I go through all the materials that they share with me. Of course, I listen to them and I go through all the materials. But as a mediator, I don't decide immediately who is right and who is wrong, because mediation is not about that. It's about helping them to come to a decision, at least mutually acceptable and maximum maybe even beneficial for both of them. So that's why I do not try even to identify who violates what, you see. If, for example, the case comes from court, then it is obvious that somebody violated something, and there is a requesting party and responding party. If both parties applied, or one party applied and we invited, or I invited, I mean, we, by saying we, I mean the center, or I invited the other party, it's not my right to decide on whether who violates or who violated the contract. When we say that caucus is not confidential by default in case of family mediation, what kind of information can be shared with the other party? So if they do not agree in advance to mediation session that something should be kept confidential, then mediator shares all the information and they know about that. So all the information is shared with both parties. If they want something to be kept confidential, then they have to agree on that in advance. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Rania.
In terms of for family disputes, the agreeing beforehand on confidentiality, wouldn't that aggravate even more? I mean, if one party thinks the other has something secretive to say, I don't understand why it's not the other way around. By default, it's confidential and they can share if you want. I think that's to start a session saying I want a confidential meeting, say between two spouses or a divorce case or so on.
It depends because the cases are different and confidentiality applies to different types of information. So if they agree, it's okay. I mean, if they agree that, okay, this is to be confidential, or maybe all the information is confidential. They also may agree that all the information that they share in caucus is confidential. But typically in family mediation, unless they agree in advance that it is confidential, it is not confidential by default.
So if it's a battered wife, for example, the husband has to agree that it's confidential. I mean, so she cannot say something confidentially to you, and she needs his agreement for it to be confidential.
And yes, and they agree on that. But you know, so in family cases, it is quite difficult sometimes. Just imagine that some of the spouses, I mean, one of them has extradiotic, right? I hope this is understandable, relationship. Extradiotic relationships. And in the caucus, this spouse asks you to share this information with the other party, while actually the mediation itself is devoted to some issues that are family issues. I mean, inside the family. I don't know, maybe property, maybe it's about children, maybe it's about their relations. And he asks you to share, he or she asks you to share the information about extradiotic relationships. Would you do that as a mediator?
It's not relevant, no, I think, to the case.
Yes, absolutely. And I wouldn't do, because I think it's an attempt to shift responsibility.
Yeah.
And another thing, you cannot predict the reaction of the other spouse. I don't know, maybe it will cause heart attack or something.
Yeah.
That's why I would not risk. And I would say that, sorry, this is not related actually to the matter that we are discussing here. If you want to tell it, okay, you can do it yourself. But let's come back to the issues that are on our agenda, and it is actually not on our agenda. You see?
Yeah.
If there are no any other questions, I would like to share with you also some practical examples why caucusing is helpful. Just imagine the situation when, let's say, one of the party has assumptions. So let's say they won't pay the contract on time. Just imagine that they say that in joint meeting, and they will just argue on that. As a mediator, I'm going to test those assumptions. Okay, I will ask a question. So how did you come up at this conclusion? And imagine that the answer, okay, they did not pay last month on time. Did you find out what was the reason for not paying on time? Yes, we did. And they said that it was caused by, let's say, financial issues with other contractors. Okay, and did they finally pay? Yes, they did. Okay, let's now come back to your assumption. You are saying that they won't pay on time. Do you still think like that? You see, caucus is very helpful to test assumptions. This is one practical situation. And another practical example, and it is related to commercial mediation. Imagine it's a bargaining phase. And one party says that, let's say, they are going to offer 5,000, while the other side is expecting 50,000. So the other side may take this offer as an insulting one. I hope you all know such a term in negotiation as an offensive offer or insulting offer or proposal. And if you know in advance that the other side, if you as a mediator know in advance that the other side will take this offer as an insulting one, you have a chance to discuss it with this party. Again, asking questions. So what do you think? What will be their reaction like to this amount of money? And how would it influence the whole process? Let's say the whole success that has already been reached in the process. You see, I think such kind of steps and techniques, they are not applicable in joint meetings, but they are very, very applicable in private sessions, and they are very helpful. I'm not breaking impartiality here. I'm not breaking neutrality. I'm trying to help them to settle. You see, and usually if you know how to do it, if you ask them good questions, caucus is very helpful. And that's why it is used by many mediators. Any other questions so far? Or maybe comments? Maybe some of you has something to share with all of us also about your experience of caucusing. Yes, Nauman.
Yes, I just wanted to have a feedback. There was this simulation that I conducted recently over a month ago. So during that, there were a lot of emotions in the room between the two parties. At least 4 parties were there. So some parties were saying we do not want to sit with the party C, and the party B did not want to sit with party D. And there was an environment of, a fighting going on between them. So it was right after the opening session when I called a joint session to have the concern or whatever they want to, they want to share about the overall problem that they face. So during that session, I saw that the environment or the atmosphere is not right to have a joint meeting. So I just break the session and I just told them that we are going to have a separate session in which we are going to hear about your concern, hear about your. So that early caucusing, that depends on the mediator at that time, right? That it should be carried out or not, just because at that time we have the ability to do that, because we do not want to derail the process. We do not want to, because we are there to facilitate them. So was that the right decision to do that? Because the environment was not in favor of that joint session. But after doing that, when I went towards the separate session, agenda settings were held, then I went towards the interest phase. And after that, when the situation was, when I thought that now it's a better choice to, bring the parties together. So I brought them together again. But at that time, still the tension was high, but not as much as before. So do you think that that decision was good, number one? And also, so breaking the session was the right decision by my side. What do you think about that?
I think, in my humble opinion, it was a good decision because you also confirmed that later the relationship were not so confrontational as at the beginning. You see, if it's just a simulation, typically we do not have premediation phase in simulation, right? When it's a real mediation and you have a chance to have premediation phase, let's say preparation with parties, I think premediation phase is very helpful in terms of deciding about design of the process. And to caucus or not, it is a part of designing the process, mediation process. And premediation is very helpful to decide just before mediation session. How the relationships are they ready to speak to each other in joint meeting? But again, in commercial mediation, even if the relations are good, typically they start in joint meeting, and then when bargaining begins, it takes place in private meetings.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments, maybe examples? No?
Thank you so much, Fidana. I really liked your practical examples also. It's always so good to hear from how things can go in mediation, in real mediation, and how this is solved. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge with us and to answer all this question. Yeah, let's get a big applause just for one moment. Please switch your cameras on and give this appreciation to Fidana. Thank you.